Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Aaron Boyd. I'm the Senior Editor for Technology and Events at NextGov. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Out of Office, Telework Opportunities and Challenges, hosted by NextGov and Defense One, in partnership with INSA and underwritten by Perspecta. With the COVID crisis keeping people out of the office and working from home, this webinar focuses on the challenges unique to the intelligence and national security workforces as it pivots to increase and expand the use of telework. The discussion will focus on teleworking at the DoD and the IC during the COVID crisis, including the technology challenges and resources, opportunities to perform classified work in a non-traditional environment, cybersecurity risks, and lessons learned, as well as addressing the policies, practices, and procedures related to telework. But before we get started with today's program, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. To the right of your screen, you'll find several icons, including the Q&A tab, which allows you to ask a question. We'll be fielding those toward the end of the program, but feel free to submit along the way so we can get right to them at the end. If you experience any technical difficulties, there's a red button at the bottom of the screen that says Test Your Connection. That button will take you to a help page. From there, you can browse a number of solutions, or you can chat directly with a member of our support team. Due to an influx of digital streaming and limited bandwidth, if you lose connection at any point during the program, we encourage you to simply refresh your browser. This webcast is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Before we get started with our panel discussion, though, I'd like to turn the floor over to Susan Wilson-Heckenberg, President of INSA, for discussion with our underwriter, Perspecta. Suzanne?
Thanks so much, Aaron. It's now my pleasure to introduce an INSA Advisory Committee member and friend, Orlando Figueiredo, who is the Vice President of Business Development at Perspecta. Orlando, really appreciate your taking time out of your afternoon for this conversation. Good to have you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate the opportunity to join in the conversation and really to hear what the panel has to say.
So, several months ago, I was talking to a couple of senior leaders at Perspecta and was really impressed by some of the proactive measures you all were taking for the health and safety of your workforce and to get folks back in responsibly to the workplace, particularly in classified environments. Can you tell our audience a little bit about how Perspecta pivoted in regard to this health and safety of getting your workforce back into the physical workspace?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, at the very early signs that there was going to be a pandemic, even before the first case happened in the United States, Perspecta stood up a COVID task force to really address the potential for a pandemic and to prepare the company. And that task force was chaired by our CEO, Matt Curtis, and the work streams were led by the executive leadership team that met daily and started developing a framework to ensure continuity. So there were three main work streams that came out of that. One was communications, one was connectivity, and the third was security. And it was really around the whole communications piece of it that the health and welfare of the workforce came to mind. So one of the things we did initially was really focused on communicating to the workforce the potentials for telework or the potentials if things got worse. So we very quickly went completely virtual with our town halls, not only to communicate, but really to stress test our network and our collaboration tools in the event that it would happen. We launched a comprehensive internal website and a mobile site to keep all of our employees abreast of company news and facility updates. And then when our customers did finally make a decision to close offices and move to telework, the workforce expanded its focus to include what we call a Family First initiative, which identified all of our employees that were impacted by either work stoppage or office closures and helped them define either temporary or permanent roles within Perspecta. And the goal there was really to ensure our employees that Perspecta would take care of them through this time. For those employees that continued to work, that were mission essential and came to the office every day, we implemented temperature screenings with professional medical staff, so we had nurses located within our major locations that made sure that everybody was tested coming in and out. We also continued with expanding facilities clearances and all of those things that we now consider commonplace, made sure that masks were being worn internally, that there was hand sanitizers everywhere. A lot of these things are commonplace today, but back in the late February, early March timeframe when we were communicating with our customers, it was really a novel thing to take on.
That's helpful to get a glimpse of the bigger picture of how you all approach this. You know, over the past several months, a lot of folks refer to silver linings, lessons learned related to the pandemic. I think all of us would prefer that we had not discovered these lessons learned and the silver linings. But along that vein, what do you and your colleagues at Perspecta see as some of the opportunities and then some of the challenges that were presented by this pivot to telework?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to say there are silver linings during times like this, but there are a number of things that we found in working with our customers that were very beneficial. And I have to say that really there is a silver lining for Perspecta. It's to see how our employees rally together to support one another and our customers through these times. And our ability to hire has remained steady, so it's good to be able to see that we've been able to take our employees through this time. The other piece of it is really around the flexibility that we were able to do as a company to help our clients, right? Many clients had different ways of approaching the telework aspect. Some went to shift work, some included weekend work, some included different team colors in how they approached it, and the fact that as a large company we were able to support that, we thought was a silver lining. There were also other areas where we were able to support our customers, and those included the opening up of our SCIF space. Once our customers decided that they were moving folks out of their offices, and we were able to understand which of our contracts were moving from either customer spaces to telework or our spaces to telework. We were able to open up some of our SCIF spaces to ensure that our customers were able to continue their mission essential work and follow the CDC guidelines. So that became a big piece of it, and we were fortunate that we had the space available to offer to our clients. And then really from our ability to continue helping, because Perspecta Labs is an NSA CFSC trusted integrator, there were a number of places where we were able to support our clients with solutions that allowed them to telework outside of the SCIF space. And we continue to do that today with such things as rapid automated configuration, network switching, and things like that. So there were a number of solutions that we were able to offer our clients during this time.
So Orlando, along that vein of technology, how well were you all positioned, like from day one, to transition to teleworking for a good portion of your workforce initially?
Yeah, that's a great question. For a large portion of our Perspecta employees, the transition was relatively seamless. Although many of our employees had some unique situations, such as dealing with various child care or school closures, college shutdowns, and things like that, the majority of our programs and contracts were able to transition to telework relatively smoothly. That was not really the case with a number of our defense and intel programs, where our customers could not shift that work outside or into telework situations. So for us, that meant making sure that our employees were able to do shift work, were able to do weekend work, and were able to support the mission in whatever way we could.
So,
really, I think if you ask me today, I would say that COVID really became a forcing function on how to change the way we execute mission and execute it in a different way. For a lot of our customers, the big decision was what level of risk to take on and what could be done in an unclassified fashion. On a number of our major contracts, we actually built telework plans and submitted them to our customers, and they used quite a bit of that in their telework and outward-facing movements. So a lot of that came in part on making sure that we were focusing and prioritizing on the big-ticket items. That became a priority, making sure that cyber and counterintelligence component was out in front, determining what could be done in an unclassified level. So there was a lot of back and forth with our customers to make sure we were able to support them.
So here we are, coming towards the end of July. I think a lot of us didn't initially envision that this would be going on this long, or that we would be projecting out as far as we are. But in present day terms, how is Perspective's workforce, as far as physical workspace versus working from home, how have you all been able to divide that up?
So from that perspective, the situation continues to evolve pretty much on a daily basis. Perspective has employees in, the majority of our employees in around 23 states. So we're pretty diverse from that perspective. One of the avenues that is working well is our site ambassador program. Each large site has a leader that's responsible for not only staying abreast of the different state, local, and municipal requirements, but also making sure that that information flows upward to the COVID task team and downward to all of the employees within their sites. So that allows us to develop comprehensive plans for each work location, regardless of what phase they're in, and really to make sure that as a company we understand what each state or each county is doing, and make sure that our employees are aware.
Well, it sounds like you all have really had your workforce as well as your government customers as your top priority there. Any closing thoughts you'd like to share with our virtual attendees before we turn things over to Aaron and the panel?
If you had asked me in February and March when this all started that we would be about this in July, I wouldn't have believed you. But I think one of the things that this teaches us is that we really need to be prepared and have continuity plans, both internally as industry and from a government perspective, because as we've all found out, these things are bound to happen. And they include such things as, from an intelligence community perspective, really figuring out how much risk we can take in moving pieces of the mission into an unclassified fashion. I think many of our customers are now doing a really good job of determining that and really working through the security aspects of it. We as industry need to be there not only to support, but to be able to manage that work through any one of these pandemics or conflicts. So I think that really the bottom line is, for all of us, we've now learned that work is really a product, not a location. We've seen a lot of productivity from our telework force, specifically around the support side of the house. So facilities, HR, security, and other areas really haven't missed a beat. And I think for the next generation of workforce, both for industry and the intelligence community, that flexibility and the fact of folks that are able to work in various aspects should be top of mind.
Well said, and thanks again for taking time out of your afternoon for this conversation. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to Aaron and our esteemed panelists. Aaron?
Thanks, Suzanne. First off, let's meet our speakers for today. We have Jeff Fowler, Chief Information Officer at the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the Department of State. Linnea Jones, Acting Chief Information Officer of the Intelligence Community within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Peter Ranks, Deputy Chief Information Officer for Information Enterprise at the Department of Defense, and Carrie Buckley, Vice President of Air Force Programs with MITRE. As we get started here, I'd like each of you to just very briefly introduce yourselves. Let us know who you are, what those titles that I just read off, what do they really mean, and how does your work relate to managing the workforce remotely during this pandemic? Jeff, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. And I suppose on behalf of the panelists, I should say thank you also to INSA, Suzanne, and to Perspecta Orlando for hosting us. It's an important conversation to be having now. I think, we might think that COVID-19 is what is having us do the telework right now. And then when it goes away, this goes away. But I don't think so. I think we're going to be living in this world for quite some time to come. Mm-hmm. My background, I'm a 32-year veteran of the IC, a CIO officer. I'm on detail over to the Department of State, where I'm serving as Chief Information Officer. Like my colleagues with the same title, it means we're responsible for the technology enablement of mission. In my particular case, I didn't grow up in the technology world. I spent the last half of my career there. The first half was as an analyst. Fortunately, that means that I understand the business that I'm enabling with technology, and so that's a primary focus for me. You asked about sort of our jobs. The other job that I would say is that I'm a parent, and I think I've got school-age children, like many of our workforce and colleagues. And when you start thinking about that and understanding sort of the complexities of enabling work in that type of environment, I think the truth is that when we think about our business and what we're doing here, it's not just about technology enablement, it's also about enabling human beings. My motto, really, for all of this is remember your humanity. Through all of this, that's the thing that drives me.
Fantastic. And we'll dig more into all of that because you hit on a bunch of high-level topics that I know we're going to be talking about. So thank you. Linnea, let's hear from you.
Good afternoon, and echoing Jeff's messages, sending the same regards. Thank you for having us. My name is Linnea Jones. So as the acting CIO of the intelligence community, what we provide in that role is we work with all of the 17 IC agencies, specifically the CIOs, and we work to further technical or technology-related issues and concerns. We work on interoperability. We work across the community to ensure that mission needs are being met and shared resources. It could be topics such as cybersecurity or cloud, or working with our industry partners as well as our colleagues regarding data. I myself, as well as others, are as well been at the Office Director of National Intelligence for a few years now as a detailee. And so in that role, it's been great to work with defense, work with colleagues across the IC, all 17 of the elements, as well as work with our industry partners in order to further the mission.
Fantastic. Peter, who are you? What do you do?
Hi, thanks, Aaron. Hello, everyone. My name is Pete Ranks. I'm, as it says, a Deputy Chief Information Officer at DoD. There's a number of us, and my portfolio really involves software modernization, the way we build and deploy software for the DoD, and all the supporting technologies from cloud to infrastructure and everything else. I think it was my pre-existing relationships with some of the cloud vendors, as well as the role in delivering collaboration capabilities that kind of thrust me into the how do we respond to telework conversation when this spun up. Like Jeff, I'm actually a CIA employee on detail over to DoD. I've been here about 15 months. I spent the majority of my career in IT and technical support to intelligence, and a little bit of time in the counterproliferation and collection communities as well. So happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. And, it's funny, I didn't even realize that when we were first setting up this panel, we've got civilian, defense, and IC, but really you're all just IC in disguise here. And just to round out our intros, Carrie, let's hear from you.
Great, thanks, Aaron. I guess you could say I might be IC in disguise as well, based on my past career. But currently, I am a Vice President at the MITRE Corporation, running our support to the Air Force. some folks may not be familiar with MITRE. We are a not-for-profit. We operate 7 FFRDCs for the government. My job falls within one of our largest FFRDCs, our National Security Engineering Center. We have 8,500 employees, or maybe a little bit more, and the work that we do out of the NSEC FFRDC is very much in support of the DoD and IC. So what that means is that during these times, my responsibility has been making sure that we can maintain our mission impact for those sponsors. That means making sure that our folks have access to the data and the collaboration tools that they need. Like Perspective, we've also kept our SCIFs open throughout the pandemic, so we've been really focused on the well-being and safety of our folks that do have to come in to do that work. But like Perspective, we've also found incredible innovation and willingness and new ways to tackle some of these traditionally classified problems in unclassed settings, looking at different mechanisms and data and sources to do that. And I'll just say we've also, from similar to Jeff, we've really taken a people-first approach through all of this, understanding both the work-life and family challenges that folks are addressing. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, Carrie, I'm going to start with you, but just before I do, a reminder to the audience listening out there: if you have questions along the way, please drop those in the Q&A, the attendee questions box, as you have them. If we get toward about 150 and I'm not seeing questions populate, I'm just going to keep talking, and nobody wants that. So if you have questions, get them in to make sure that we can get there at the end. So, Carrie, I wanted to start with you and hear about two things from you. First, you started talking in your introduction about how MITRE has adjusted to the current situation. Be interested in hearing a little bit more about that and what kind of innovations or unexpected changes you all went through in order to adapt to this crisis. And then I'd love for you to provide us the 10,000-foot view. You have some visibility across the U.S. government as an FFRDC. So I'd be interested to hear some of the interesting things you've seen across government. And then we'll go to everyone else and dive into some of those unique use cases. So again, first, Carrie, how has MITRE been handling all this?
Great, thanks. Great question, Aaron. One thing, as you mentioned, that the MITRE does have the vantage point in is we do operate across the whole of government. We also bridge between the private sector and government. So one of the first things that MITRE did is we stood up a COVID-19 healthcare coalition, and we are up to about 900 partners right now, where we have an online presence, where we are helping state, local, federal, and industry understand how they can best respond to COVID and some of the various aspects of that, to include things like the clinical care outcomes. We're tracking that, tracking that with the nation in partnership with CDC and universities, understanding the critical supply chain and where folks can get those supplies, and also public guidance and policy. So that MITRE really stepped into our mission of solving problems for a safer world by providing a resource to all of the decision makers across the country. Internally, we set up a similar dashboard. We have a dashboard that tracks the trends and localities of our campuses and our sites, as well as being very transparent about the health and safety of our own folks. We actually post the number of folks that have been tested and tested positive, so that we can use that data to be very informative in terms of what sites, facilities might need to be closed for cleaning and who may or may not be available, though not naming people by person.
You wouldn't want to run afoul of HIPAA and all that.
That's right. We also purchased cell phones for all of our employees, so we are now focused on a mobile-first platform and the way that we do all of our work. We are looking at all kinds of different collaboration tools. We've also changed some of our policies and procedures, relaxing some of the medical leave and D-time that we have. We've expanded other types of time charging so folks can make up time that they don't typically charge because of other obligations or taking care of loved ones, so that we've extended that. And then we're also looking at new ways that we're going to be using our facilities. As I mentioned, with our SCIFs and putting shift work in, we're providing free food to everyone who does have to come into the office. What we're seeing across the DoD and the IC is just our sponsors are embracing our innovative ideas and really working closely with us to accommodate and leverage some of the innovation that's coming as a result of this. Something that we talked about earlier was our ability to leverage people around the world now, wherever they may be, to bring new ideas to the table, because we don't have to all be sitting in the same room to whiteboard or come up with ideas. So we really are looking at the expansion of being able to bring in new talent and partners throughout this time, and I think we're learning a lot there. And then lastly, I'll say, last year I know, and at the DNI, they stood up the initiative around right, trusted, and an agile workforce. So this was really looking at making sure that we can build and accommodate a workforce for the future. And I do think that the pandemic response that we're all responding to is really, it's truly a catalyzing opportunity to make us think differently and how we really might be much more agile in the future.
Excellent. Linnea, Carrie teed you right up there perfectly. You want to talk about some of those initiatives that the IC had already incorporated and how they were well-timed to meet this crisis?
Absolutely, and sure. And so, yes, as Carrie mentioned about RTA, or the Right Trusted Agile Workforce, that was absolutely one of the initiatives that we had already, prior to the pandemic, began to look at improving how individuals are brought into the intelligence community, from a clearance process, from a skills process, from just the timeliness of transferring, whether it be public and private, and how we work across the community with individuals maybe going from one location, one office or organization to another. And so, as Carrie mentioned, with that, this gave us a great opportunity to innovate some of the early seedlings that were put in place to look at how to improve items. We had always had the option or the availability of teleworking for certain elements. It just wasn't maybe to the same size, scale, or scope. Perhaps it was for an accommodation, and perhaps it was for extenuating circumstances. But when the pandemic came about, one of the IC's main strength is being agile and being able to flexibly meet the needs of the mission. And so this just gave us a chance to look at those ideas, those initiatives, and to expand them for the situation. Over.
Excellent. So I'd like to dig in more and stay with you for a second, Linnea, to talk about how fast you were able to pivot to allowing classified work to continue. At the beginning of this pandemic, there was a slow move to telework, and then there was all of a sudden a rush to it. How was the IC able to adjust to that, and how long did it take you all to figure out workflows and processes that would allow classified work to continue? And how have you been able to make that continue?
So I guess you could say, as with everything else, in the beginning, there's always kind of that learning curve. So sometimes people will say you're kind of building the airplane as you're flying it. But because we did have some policies and procedures and workflows in place, it was more about, how can we make the most sense of this, and how can we maybe lift or shift or partner with others to capitalize and make the best use of this opportunity. So in the beginning, it was a lot of, we had to see what was going on. I think that was not just for the intelligence community, but for many sectors, of really assessing and doing that initial triage, and then using that piece to kind of innovate and make our way through it. But when it came to the policies, the procedures, this was a time also that we could update things, because we actually had the ongoing pandemic in order to improve the processes. So some things that may had been written before or tried out before, now we actually had an actual situation, and we knew what worked, what didn't work, and we could further those efforts.
Excellent. Peter, for the DoD, how does all that track for your experience? Was it similar being able to make that transition? How long did it take you to get the necessary infrastructure, policies, culture in place, or was it a light switch?
Yeah, no, of course it's not a light switch, and I think some of our experience probably tracks with many others. We were lucky that seeds had been planted for a lot of these solutions long before. They just weren't growing, with all the urgency we could give them. We had an existing remote work program. We had people who were teleworking every day, but it was never more than about 90 to 100,000 users on a day, which is a lot in real terms, but as a percent of the DoD workforce is only about 5%. So there's a big gap between about 5% telework and approaching 70 or 80% telework. But we had programs in place. We had some programs for remote classified work. Most of them had been very targeted at specific niche problems, and we had to work to scale them. I think we were able to respond very quickly in the unclass space by moving users into an online collaboration tool. We now have about 960,000 users using an online environment we call CVR, which is just a collaborative environment. That happened remarkably quickly, and I think we leveraged the urgency of the moment to waive policies where we had to accelerate processes, to take advantage of some existing contracts to do it. On the classified side, it was harder. Luckily, again, we already had the blueprints drawn up, but just scaling the production, those are high touch, producing the devices for classified remote work, all the commercial solutions for classified, for which that is high touch in-person labor. And it was difficult to scale that in a safe way in order to meet the demand. We did eventually hit our stride, but whereas we moved into the unclassified space very broadly over the span of 60 days, I think it's only recently that we feel like we have hit a lot of the demand for remote work at the secret level.
So you mentioned that it took some time to spin up. How were you able to get there? Was it just lots of contracts with different suppliers to boost production, or were you able to actually reach out there and help boost production in some way?
Yeah, the first thing we had to do is find out where all those programs were buried within the department. So, the department's a big place. There is not a commercial solutions for classified or a secret work from home program. There were a dozen of them. And so we actually worked with NSA, who has to approve all of those things, to first of all just get our arms around those in a daily kind of IT reform or COVID telework task force that the DoD CIO chaired, and get shared awareness of where all those things were. And once we knew where all of them were and what their state of maturity was, we could ensure that they had all the approvals they needed. And then the ability to ramp production ended up being very local actions. I mean, I think, in DISA's case, they had to identify the right amount of SCIF location. They had to replicate some infrastructure for provisioning. And then they had to bring in a lot of people who did a lot of in-the-office hands-on work to make that happen. I think in some of the other services, it involved ramping up agreements with suppliers in order to do that. It was difficult. A lot of these solutions, rely on a 2 generations old version of a tablet or something else that we have baked the configuration around, and getting rapid infusions of supply for those types of devices was difficult. And I think one of the lessons we draw from this is that those types of solutions have to be agile and adaptable to, we have to not be too tightly tethered to specific hardware platforms, because that was one of our friction points for scaling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jeff, I wanted to move over to you and talk a bit about the State Department, which I think of as like the other IC agency, right? State Department definitely has a lot of intelligence work that it does in support of the IC. And you also have an interesting perspective, because I know State Department's resources are very much federated across the world in many areas where infrastructure is not always there, security isn't always easy to attain. So when this pandemic hit home here at the States. How much of those lessons that you had learned overseas were you able to ramp up here at home?
Yeah, so I was listening to my colleagues, and I think we actually took a slightly different approach than what other folks did. First of all, I guess I should start by saying, as a department, the department was fairly well situated to do remote operation. Most of its work is done in the unclassified world, and we had fairly robust unclassified systems connecting posts all over the world with the Truman Building. So there wasn't a whole lot of change there other than to just move it to a more robust kind of status. It was different in the Bureau, right, because there we've got intelligence analysts operating at essentially a top secret level for the most part. Trying to enable top secret outside of sort of protected enclaves is extremely difficult, and it's made even more difficult when you're trying to do that in a rush. And so, frankly, we didn't. What we did is we recognized that the business environment had changed around us with COVID, with sort of distributed customer sets, teleworking, as well as the producers of intelligence teleworking. And so we changed our business model largely. And we focused a lot on what we could do with unclassified information. So there was a large emphasis on enabling use of open source, producing new product lines, thinking about how to provide value to customers, traditional customers of intelligence, but to do it with largely open source based commentaries. At the beginning of this, I also mentioned that we think a lot about tools and technology enablement just because of the nature of our business. But there really is a human enablement component to this. I think Orlando touched on it at the very beginning. So, we did a lot of things like reducing or eliminating the requirement for core hours, right? So, you can't come in during the day because you've got a spouse who needs to work and you've got children at home, but your spouse can spell you in the evening hours. You can come in during the evening to get the classified piece of your work done while you've done your unclassified teleworking remotely. So removing core hours, giving people just maximum flexibility. And the other thing, oddly enough, I said flexibility there because you need to provide that to folks. What we discovered is the importance of providing structure. And again, I go back to my quip that I'm also a dad as a second job. And I've come to understand with my own children in this sort of environment how important it is to provide a structure for them in a rather unstructured period. The same is true in business. Even though we need to provide flexibility to the workforce and enable that their operations technologically and through business process, we also need to give them a structure that creates sort of a new normal for them. So those are the sorts of things that we focused on. Sure, distributed some secure comms capabilities and what have you, but the heaviest reliance was on secure but unclassified systems.
Yeah, excellent. You mentioned that you were able to do, really focus, as others have mentioned too, right? You started off focused on that unclass and then mixed in some of the classified work as you were able to normalize your operations for the times. At the State Department, can you give us a percentage or some kind of idea how much of the work that gets done is classified versus unclassed?
Well, I would have to distinguish between the Bureau and the Department. So the Department is massive, global, and the vast majority of it is unclassified, or generally, if you say system high in the Department, most people think secret. But within the Bureau, which is one of the 17 members of the IC, but which also sits in the Department, providing intelligence support to the Department, system high is TS, code word, and pretty much everything that folks do is done on that system. It's the same sort of challenge that I know my colleagues from CIA would be familiar with back at our home agency. It's very difficult to do top secret work in outside of protected enclaves.
Yeah, understandable. So, taking with that in mind, I want to shift back over to some of our other panelists to get an idea of how that classified work is getting done. We've mentioned some shift rotations. I know some of you are doing things like proxy, so you can basically take the classified nature out of the data or the workload and do it in an unclassified manner and then match it back. Can we talk about some of how that works? Linnea, let's start with you. How have you been able to help people do the classified work in this time? Can they do it at home? Do they have to be in a SCIF? How does that work?
So that's a good question, and let me answer from an IC perspective because it is a little different depending on where you are and what work being done. By and large, for most of the intelligence community, you could say you're 99%. All of the classified work should be performed in a secure facility. When I say classified work, I mean data or information that we would like to have protected at higher levels. And so, but within the IC, we do have multiple domains or multiple classifications. So as some of my colleagues spoke about work in the unclassified realm or unclassified world, yes, we do have data information and environments that are available on the unclassified world and have been even prior to the pandemic that people are able to do some work remotely via that. But by and large, when it comes to what typically the IC traditionally is known for, which is your higher classified related items, yes, that is in a secure facility. We do, of course, have situations where you have maybe facilities working with vendors or working in other locations, or working with defense. But by far and large, it is in a secure facility. So the way that we looked at the challenge or the problem or the situation was, okay, if most of the work that, say, majority of the workforce needs to do is in this secure facility within that bubble, how can we maximize our efforts? And that's where you have a lot of flexible work agreements. You have a lot of time sharing as far as, although we may have folks situated here in the D.C. metropolitan area, there could be members of the intelligence community in other places because our mission is not just here. And also, when you think about the IC, it's a very large swath of different types of intelligence because their mission sets are so variable, right? So, we have some of the intelligence agencies that traditionally operate on the higher classified domains, which as some of the services operate on the secret domain, and then you might have some elements that maybe do more of their mission on the unclass side. So because it varies in the type of intelligence that we're performing, it does specifically depend on the mission set, and that mission set is what we look at as what is the risk or what is the way that we can achieve that and how. And it may not be just from your normal 9 to 5 here in the D.C. area. It could be somewhere else. And so, but unlike my colleagues, we are a little more stringent maybe with trying to do that. And it's just because the work is just a little different. We all work in the same field, but just doing a little bit of a different role. So, over.
Man, that is an excellent point. The diversity of the mission and how none of this is static. As I'm thinking about it here, other than the intelligence community, which is such a wide community, probably the only ones that might have more diverse mission sets within a single group might be DOD and maybe Commerce Department, just because Commerce is a grab bag of all kinds of agencies and missions, but with far less classified work. Peter, I'd be interested to hear from you on this topic, especially because your role is to look at the entire enterprise across DOD. What kind of high-level guidance are you giving to components in the military branches about doing classified work right now, particularly remotely or how people come in on rotations and the like? How much of that applies across the whole DOD, and how much of that do you have to give general advice and then let the components make their own decisions?
Yeah, I think it's important that within DoD that there is always a lot of autonomy preserved at a local command or a component level. We are globally dispersed and have to respond to local conditions and diverse missions, and we really need commanders on the ground to be able to make those calls. So we try and give out guidance that is going to allow people to make smart choices and keep things safe. We tried really hard to stem the proliferation of shadow IT during this episode, because we had every command has their local IT staff and their local CIO trying to solve the problems for themselves. Mm-hmm. And what we didn't want was a proliferation of solutions that we had limited visibility into. Going back to the classified side, Lena's points are spot on, I think, for us as well, that although we talk about what it takes to enable some classified work remotely, I think it's really important to condition that, to say, first of all, that's only going to occur with a certain sensitivity of data. And second, although from home I can view a secret presentation or join a secret phone call, if my job is in the warfighting domain to be looking at a common operating picture and directing the movement of aircraft, I'm only doing that in the office. And if I'm an intel analyst and I'm working at the TS level, I'm only doing that in the office. So at that point, it comes down to more of the human factors conversation: is how do we stagger shifts? How do we limit the number of people who are in the office in order to do that work? And we really left most of those decisions to local commanders.
Interesting. Yeah. So we are getting closer to the end of the time, and I asked for questions from the audience, and you all have delivered. So we've got tons of those. Before we get to those, though, Carrie, I wanted to give the last question from me. I wanted to put to you. I mentioned before the idea of turning classified workflows into unclassified proxy projects. Can you talk about how some of that works at MITRE and throughout the defense and intelligence communities?
Sure. I will again reiterate what you've just heard from our perspective as well. So when we are doing the top secret, the secret problems and delivering on those DoD and IC projects, we are also within the secure facilities. But to your question, being an R&D organization, we do try and carve off perhaps some of those R&D challenges that you could start looking at new solutions, new ways to solve those challenges. So you could put it in the context maybe of a FEMA or a crisis response activity, and then think about how you could pull in new modeling and simulation tools or things like digital engineering, even looking at non-traditional data sources. So those are the types of ways that we have expanded the aperture in which we address the problems. And so I think that's really something that, as I mentioned earlier, really led to some innovation. And as we make those discoveries, then we can kind of package up maybe the code, the tools, the findings, and then port them back over to the classified space so that we can deploy them on the real data.
Fantastic. Great. And with that, I'm going to move over to some of the Q&A from the audience. As I mentioned, we've got quite a few questions here, so we're going to try to get through as many as we can. First off, a consultant with the Defense Department asked, our DoD office has experienced a great increase in productivity, collaboration, and morale since shifting to telework. What policies need to be changed to keep telework in place, and what aspects of telework will DoD maintain when the COVID-19 crisis is over? Peter, that sounds like it's for you.
Okay, yeah, it's a good point, and we've heard that from a number of corners that says, hey, we actually have found, particularly if you're working in a knowledge work environment or something that's transactional, that productivity has benefited from this environment. And one of the things we learned, and I think this speaks to the question, is we built out some of the collaboration capabilities because we wanted to be prepared in case our existing, like remote VPNs and everything, if that collapsed and we were underwater with capability, we wanted this as kind of a catch-all. One of the things we learned is that there's a huge latent demand in the DoD for a capability to easily collaborate with your team, to easily jump on a call, to flip between working on a document together and back and forth. These are not new discoveries for industry, but for DoD, where we didn't have all of this capability, I think it was a revelation. We also, because we built this out as an enterprise system, meaning a DoD-wide enterprise system as opposed to something that was service unique, there's fewer barriers to collaboration across the military services and the other agencies and field activities that make up the Department of Defense. And I think we're looking very hard right now at what we can preserve. So there's a handful of things that we specifically want to preserve. Number one is that capability to collaborate seamlessly across the entire department so you're not locked into organizational boundaries elsewhere in the department. Number two is to be able to do that from outside the network perimeter, which is really going to accelerate the conversation about zero trust within the department. And third, a little bit, I think, longer-term goal is to be able to leverage more personal devices to be able to access that type of content. This is all at the unclassified layer. So there's programs in work now to try and make permanent some of what we authorize as a temporary solution going forward. My last comment on that is the tools can only do so much here. The other thing that we really have to focus on within the department is the culture. Organizational culture is extremely resilient, and I do think that there's a chance that in a command and control environment like DoD, as soon as the leadership is back holding all their meetings in person, that flows quickly through the enterprise. So we can help from a technology enablement standpoint, but we need that continued leadership commitment to a new normal that's going to be a little bit more flexible environment for our workers.
Yeah. Peter, I want to stay with you for this next question. It wasn't directed specifically at you, but some of the things you just mentioned dovetail right directly into this. So a team manager from one of our underwriters, actually, asked, Agile is the direction that much of IT is moving to. One of the fundamentals of Agile is face-to-face and working closely with team members at the same table. How are you adapting Agile development to work with a remote workforce? So I feel like you got into some of that already, Peter. Would you mind just very briefly addressing it directly?
Yeah, so this is actually a great question because I would say if I could choose what to spend my time on, it would be on modernizing the way we build and deliver software for the Department of Defense. And a huge part of that is heavy user involvement in design and then rapid iteration. I don't think it's fundamentally undermined by working remotely, provided that you have a really good set of tools. There are some things you can do when you've got a shared screen in front of you that users can manipulate that are actually easier than otherwise. But I think that is particular to teams that have already established trust and a battle rhythm. And when I think about the places where in-person interaction is still incredibly important, it's building that relationship between, in this case, the development team and your user population. I'm ready for the days when we can get those teams back together to launch things and get things moving. But then as you begin to iterate, I actually think we have an opportunity to go faster here because we have times today when you think about a command and control application that we're delivering to users at the combatant commands. In order to have that type of user feedback that we have today, we fly people back, which means we can only do that on a certain rhythm. And if we could really do that effectively remotely, that means we could go from 3-month sprints to 3-week sprints and iterate a lot more quickly. So it's a great question. Love to learn from the community on this because getting the department to be more agile in delivering software is I think, one of our biggest goals.
I think there's also, because we cover Agile quite a bit here at NextGov, I think there's also the flip side to exactly what you were just talking about, where while Agile in general is intended to speed up the development process, especially for large agencies like Department of Defense, that doesn't mean that every single interaction has to be immediate, right? There is some value to, as I've been finding while teleworking during the pandemic, having someone ask you a question and being able to stop and think about it for a few minutes, a half hour, however long, or responding through whatever communication channel. So while Agile, I think, overall speeds things up, I think there could be some benefits to taking a beat every now and again. moving forward, Linnea, this next one is for you, and it's coming from inside the house. Somebody at DNI asks, what are some of the most widely used collaboration tools being used by the intelligence community to carry out unclassified work during the pandemic? Is there an office at ODNI that has evaluated and approved certain tools for use by ODNI components or other IC agencies?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to answer that. So within ODNI, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, we do have a localized IT organization. The ODNI CIO does have recommendations for tools that can be used by that agency, that element. It does vary across the community as to what tools, applications, portals, and the like, because there's many, and because we do have enterprise license agreements, or ELAs, with various companies, components, organizations, in order to facilitate that management. Within the ICCIO office and my office, we help to facilitate those ELAs across the department. So, yes, within ODNI, there are some licenses that are used. The irony is that the person can actually contact me directly at the ICCIO office if they would like to. But I would say that there are tools that they're using, applications that ODNI has set up to facilitate meetings across the community, and in some cases that might be different than others. There are some other agencies and elements that have done studies, recommendations, have done security, you could say mitigations if you would, in order for whether it be on your home and personal and private network when connecting, or maybe some recommendations in hygiene, as we would say cyber hygiene or cybersecurity for your devices. Some of the elements or agencies are issuing out devices. So, for instance, I do have ODNI issued out devices to connect to my accounts, my ODNI accounts, and then that is the case. I would say that's also an avenue and a way to go to access your official mail and your official data storage information on the unclassified side. Because there's a myriad of solutions and it really depends on the use case, I don't like to specify one is more secure or one is better than the other, because it does just depend on what you're doing. But there are at least many means and modes and ways that we can accomplish that. So I would say, A, recommend going with the ODNI CIO office, or B, going with issuing some devices, and they actually have the tools and applications set up within there. And then via the public internet, we do have some of the IC elements have issued out cyber recommendations and cybersecurity steps that anyone can use just as an American to help protect their devices on behalf of national security. Over.
Excellent. I'm going to try to get to a couple more here before we wrap up. And this next one, I'm actually going to combine two questions because they're very similar. And this is going to be for you, Linnea, and for Carrie as well. So first off, a person within DNI asks, is ODNI considering exploring systems similar to the ones Mr. Ranks mentioned that would enable ODNI or IC employees to work on classified work from home? And then also, I'm going to combine it with this other question from Tish Long, chair of INSA. Thanks, Tish. For Linnea and Carrie, what about classified work from home? I understand both the Army and the Air Force have some pilot programs for mobile secret. What is the IC doing in this arena? So I think those two kind of go together. Linnea, we'll start with you, and then we'll give the last word to Carrie.
Aaron, can I jump in on that as a third, please?
Oh, sure. We'll let you in at the end there.
So I'll go to the first question. The first one about, is ODNI considering working on classified work at home? Pete kind of hit on this. There's a lot that's wrapped in that question. Culture is one. Safety and security, huge, and these are all big areas. I wouldn't say a yes or a no to that. I think that we're constantly evolving, constantly looking at our mission and how we can maybe improve it and do things better. But it's not really a cut and dry question. Yes, there are some elements, as you mentioned, the pilots with some of the services that are doing secret. But as Pete mentioned earlier, it is for very specific use cases and subsets in very specific instances. I don't want to paint the picture or the mirage that we have people in the intelligence community that are accessing classified data from home, because that's just not the case. We're looking at it as what can we do, and within that classified data and information, what makes it classified, and are there elements and parts or pieces or processes that we can do on a lower classified domain that can mitigate that. As mentioned before, sometimes we look at it and we're in a paradigm shift, and so it makes us look at how we're operating, and in some cases there may be portions of the work that we're performing that can be done at the lower classified domains or at a telework remote facility that don't need quite as much as the enforcement of the security wrappers that the others. So I would say that that may not be the most straightforward answer, but it's really just we're taking it as we need to really evaluate it and peel back that question. And just as an onion, there's a lot wrapped in there.
Oh, yeah. So we are right about over
time. Very good. Thank you. No, you're good. I was going to say that I think Lanaya and Peter said it well, and I wanted to say hi to Tish. And yes, looking forward to, as we continue those pilots, to learn more so that how we can start bringing that into some of the contractor base as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So we are running just over time, but I did want to let the last few people just jump in on this topic. If you could keep it to like 30, 60 seconds, and then we'll move right through.
Hey, Aaron, this is Jeff. I think we started to hit on what the real elephant in the room is here, which is that the intelligence community is vulnerable because we have to rely on high walls and fortifications around our classified operations. Frankly, I feel like it's May 1940, and I'm sitting cozy and comfy in a fortification on the Maginot Line, and my adversary, who is COVID right now, is more agile than we are. So if you're talking about lessons learned from this, it's about understanding that the environment in which we're operating is changing, and we've always been vulnerable to this. We've always been sort of isolated, but we've been able to live with it. Now we can't any longer, so we need to change.
All right. And unfortunately with that, I'm getting the hard hook, so we're going to have to wrap up here. Wanted to thank Jeff, Linnea, Pete, and Carrie. You all were fantastic today. And thank you, our audience, for listening and for submitting so many great questions. As a reminder, the on-demand event will be sent to you later this week, and we encourage you to share with your colleagues who may have missed today's discussion. Our program would not be possible without the support of our underwriter, Perspecta, and I also want to thank INSA for partnering with us on the Powering the Mission Readiness series. Thanks again, and hope you all tune in with us next time.